Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. Welcome if you're new. Thank you for taking time out of your day to check the video out. We have more PlayStation news, rumors, and leaks to go over and cover today. So as always, before we dive into these topics, if you end up enjoying the video or finding it informative, be sure to leave it a like. And if you are new here to the channel, please consider hitting that subscribe button as well. We're starting here with Sony announcing the PlayStation Plus Extra and Premium lineup for March, and it's looking like another very good month. So starting Tuesday, March 21st, that's when these games will be available on both PS Plus Extra and Premium. And so these are the games that are going to be included. Uncharted, the Legacy of Thieves collection. Chia, this is a day-and-date PlayStation Plus release. We also have Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Extraction, Ghostwire Tokyo, Life is Strange True Colors, Immortals Phoenix Rising, Life is Strange 2, Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, Street Fighter V Champion Edition, Untitled Goose Game, Final Fantasy Type 0 HD, Rage 2, Neo, The World Ends With You, Haven. So those are the PlayStation Plus Extra games. It's a pretty big lineup, I would say. Certainly some games in there that I think people are going to be excited about. When it comes to PlayStation Plus Premium, for PS1, you're looking at Ridge Racer Type 4, and then you have two PSP titles, that being Ape Academy 2 and Siphon Filter Dark Mirror. So yeah, not necessarily a big month for PlayStation Plus Premium, but nonetheless, I do think that PS Plus Extra continues to be a really good deal for people who are interested in subscription services like this. And so something else I do want to make you aware of is specifically for Ghostwire Tokyo, alongside it launching into PlayStation Plus, there's going to be a big update that's going to be launching on April 12th, where it's going to add new areas to the game, new missions, new powers, new collectibles, new enemies, and a new roguelite mode. So that is the PlayStation Plus Extra and Premium lineup for March. So if you are a subscriber, let me know your thoughts down below. Moving on from that, I just want to briefly talk about Forspoken, because the game is already officially on sale on the PlayStation Store. This comes not too long after Square Enix admitted that sales of the game were lackluster and clearly didn't meet expectations. So if you're looking to buy the standard digital edition, it's on sale from $70. Now it's down to $47, and when it comes to the digital deluxe edition, the original price of that was about $95. Now it's priced at $64. So it's not a permanent discount. It's worth noting the sale or the deal is going to end on March 30th. So you have, pretty much the remainder of the month to consider purchasing Forspoken. I figured I would mention this to you guys because I did see quite a few people saying that they do have some interest in Forspoken, but they don't necessarily feel comfortable paying full price for it. So, maybe now is the time to jump into it. But we are moving on to the next set of topics, which talks about Naughty Dog, the next big game that they're working on, as well as the upcoming Last of Us multiplayer game. This is reading from WCCF Tech, and it says Neil Druckmann, creator of the games at Naughty Dog, appeared on Kinda Funny's latest Spoilercast episode to answer a few questions about Season 2. However, he also talked a bit about what's going on the game development side. Druckmann is well aware that fans would like to see The Last of Us Part 3, but he could neither confirm nor deny that that will be the next project from the studio. He only said Naughty Dog chose what it would be doing next based on the team's excitement rather than any other factor. And so this is exactly what he had to say. At the end of every project, we purposely explore several different projects. Some of them might be a sequel, and then a bunch of new ideas. And then we really feel where our passions lie, because that's the fire that has to sustain us for years to come. If you pick the wrong project and then you burn out from the idea because you don't have that passion for it 2 years into a 4-year project, you're screwed. That leads to making mediocre anything if you lose your excitement for it. He continues by saying, I know the fans really want The Last of Us Part 3. I hear about it all the time. All I can say is that, look, we're already into our next project. The decision has already been made. I can't say what it is, but that's the process we went through. There was a lot of consideration of different things, and we picked the thing that we were most excited for. So that is exactly what Neil Druckmann had to say specifically about the next big project they're working on. And before I give my thoughts on that, I also want to follow it up by saying now fans are beginning to speculate that Naughty Dog is in fact working on some type of new fantasy game or potentially a new IP. So the reason why some fans think this might be the case, well, there are a few different things. Most recently, NoClip just released a documentary on the making of The Last of Us Part 1 for PS5, and they interviewed the audio director, and it was one specific quote from the audio director that some fans thought was just kind of strange and maybe was hinting at something that Naughty Dog is currently working on. He says, quote, "Realism and sound is actually very difficult to recreate faithfully because when you do it incorrectly, it's immediately noticeable. When you're working on a big game that involves magic or, sort of hyper-realism in any really substantial way, it's easy to hide behind big sound." So obviously the reason why this is a little bit strange to some people is because, we have a Naughty Dog audio director who's talking about The Last of Us Part 1, just casually talking about doing audio of some kind that involves magic, which, automatically makes you think of a fantasy-based game. Now, obviously, that could be looking way too much into it, but before anybody assumes that, oh, this is just nonsense, keep in mind that back in 2021, a Naughty Dog artist uploaded new artwork to his ArtStation profile that definitely hinted towards a fantasy game, and people immediately were like, "Are you guys working on a fantasy game?" And he had to, come out and say, no, that's not what that was referring to. But to add even more to this, in The Last of Us Part 1, fans discovered on an in-game wall, there's a bunch of what seems to be fantasy artwork that shows like dragons and just, kind of like a fantasy world. And people have tried to figure out what this is, and it's worth noting, Naughty Dog over and over again has teased future projects in their games in similar ways. So when we go back to Neil Druckmann's quote and the way he's talking about The Last of Us Part 3, to me, it seems obvious that they're not working on The Last of Us Part 3. I did try to explain to people that there have been rumors that they're working on The Last of Us Part 3, and Neil Druckmann straight up, came out and said, "Don't believe those rumors. I wouldn't trust these insiders that are claiming this." But then when you look at his wording here, he says, I hear about fans wanting The Last of Us Part 3 all the time. All I can say is that we're already into our next project. The decision has already been made. I can't say what it is. I mean, maybe it's just me, but I'm reading that as him trying to let people know it's not The Last of Us Part 3. That's just me, but I feel like there's just a little bit too much here that's kind of adding up that seems to indicate that their next game is not going to be The Last of Us Part 3, especially when you look at the quote that came before that, how he really had to emphasize that this was like a studio decision, not just his decision, and how some people in the studio, they might get burned out if they're just constantly working on nothing but The Last of Us. But at the same time, we do have to acknowledge that he does not explicitly say that that's not what they're working on. I guess all I'm trying to say is that if we find out that their next project is The Last of Us Part 3, then this is by far the strangest way that Neil Druckmann could have worded this and said this. In my opinion, he's clearly trying to convey something. He could very well just be trying to mislead people. That's certainly a possibility. But I feel like between what he's saying here and kind of some of the evidence we've seen mounting over the past couple of years that seems to indicate they're working on something fantasy-based, yeah, I think, getting a brand new IP from Naughty Dog would be ideal at this point in time. And then maybe later on, they can start working on The Last of Us Part 3. But that's not all Neil Druckmann had to say. He did talk about the upcoming Last of Us multiplayer game, and he says the Last of Us multiplayer game is our next big title, and you will hear much more about it later this year. I'm stoked for it. This was a new experience for me personally because it's the first Last of Us game that I'm not the primary writer. I am not the director, so I get to see it more from the side while I'm in a producer role or a mentor role. That is exciting. What the team has put together is so cool. It's very different from what I would do because it was made by different people. But that to me is the part that gets me excited. I get to see other people play in this world in a leadership role and see how it comes together. I can't wait to be able to show it off. So he also does go on to say that we can expect to see and hear a lot more about this game a little bit later this year. And so, yeah, it's getting really difficult to keep kind of hearing that. I think, like, you know, everybody is just super eager to see this game, but that's the latest update we have on it. So let me know your thoughts about all that down in the comments below. But we are moving on to the final topic of the video, and this I think is pretty significant to highlight because, you know, we've been covering the Activision Blizzard situation for some time, and more recently, you know, the public to some degree has seemed to really turn on Sony because Sony's made it clear that they maybe want to block the deal, but they've also made it clear that they simply do not trust Microsoft. And a lot of people, you know, are just kind of getting frustrated, like, Sony, why don't you just sign this deal? Why are you making this such a problem? You know, all these other companies are signing a deal. So I came across this article from Metro, and it says Starfield exclusivity is why Sony doesn't trust Microsoft's promises. It says Sony's unwillingness to accept Microsoft's Call of Duty deal is partially due to the company's handling of the Bethesda acquisition. While Microsoft's acquisition of Activision Blizzard only needs approval from regulators and not Sony, the Xbox company has done everything it can to appease its rival, at least in public. Despite pledges to keep Call of Duty and other Activision titles on PlayStation and even allow Call of Duty onto PlayStation Plus, Sony has unrelentingly refused to bite. As it turns out, a major reason for this is that Sony simply doesn't trust Microsoft to uphold its promises, citing its acquisition of Bethesda and its parent company ZeniMax Media as proof that it's gone back on its word before. The outcome of the Bethesda acquisition is something we've made a point to reiterate ourselves throughout our coverage of Microsoft's Activision buyout. Before the Bethesda deal was finalized, Microsoft commented on how it wasn't so much interested in making Bethesda games exclusive to Xbox, but more so first or best. Xbox boss Phil Spencer also said that multi-platform releases would be handled on a, quote, case-by-case basis, end quote, suggesting that some, but not all of Bethesda games would continue to launch on other platforms. Yet, once everything was set in stone, Phil Spencer turned around and admitted that the deal was about, quote, delivering great exclusive games for you that ship on platforms where Game Pass exists, end quote. Both Redfall and Starfield have since only been given Xbox launch dates, and it's so far presumed the same will apply to The Elder Scrolls 6. Both Redfall and Starfield have since only been given Xbox launch dates. Bethesda's own Todd Howard said before the merger that it was, quote, hard to imagine, end quote, The Elder Scrolls 6 meeting the same fate. Just a year later, once the merger had been completed, Phil Spencer, when discussing Starfield's exclusivity, said that he, quote, sees the same for Elder Scrolls 6, end quote. Sony has obviously noticed this too, and in a statement to the Competition and Markets Authority, or the CMA, about the Activision buyout, explicitly references this as proof of Microsoft's willingness to not respect public promises. While not a violation of a behavioral commitment, Microsoft's conduct in relation to the ZeniMax acquisition provides additional evidence of why a behavioral commitment should be approached with caution, it says. It goes on to highlight how Microsoft told the European Commission ahead of the acquisition's approval that it would not have the incentive or cease or limit making ZeniMax games available for purchase on rival consoles, and told investors we highly encourage cross-platform play because if it's good for the gaming ecosystem, it's good for us. We don't have intentions of just pulling all of Bethesda content out of a competitor's platforms. This is likely why Microsoft has been so eager to stress that its 10-year deal to put Call of Duty on Nintendo's platforms is legally binding. Should Sony agree to the same offer, then Microsoft literally can't back out without inviting a lawsuit. So I thought it would be worthwhile to cover this because, as I said, Sony has kind of been, you know, not looking too good out there, and it is interesting how quickly people forget, including myself, that, yeah, Microsoft did go from talking about Bethesda like, oh yeah, you know, future Bethesda titles are just going to be first and best. That's really what we're thinking about. and case by case basis, to as soon as it went through, it's like, yeah, these games are going to be exclusive to Xbox and Game Pass, and it just wasn't even a question at that point. To me, it's pretty obvious that, like, yeah, that was intentionally done to mislead people, at least in my opinion. And it's also telling when you see Todd Howard saying, yeah, it would be hard to imagine the Elder Scrolls 6 being exclusive to Xbox. And then, Phil Spencer's like, oh yeah, we made Starfield exclusive, and I see the same thing happening for the Elder Scrolls 6 eventually. So I think it's totally reasonable that Sony doesn't trust Microsoft. And I understand that a lot of people maybe think Sony's being ridiculous here because Microsoft is giving them a legally binding 10-year contract. So yeah, it's like, hey, we're letting you know, at least for 10 years, we're not taking Call of Duty off. So I understand why some people think it's a little bit ridiculous that Sony would still be, like, I don't know, I don't trust you. But again, like, we do have to think about the long term. Sony's likely thinking about the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th year beyond that contract. And in Sony's eyes, it's pretty clear what Microsoft intends to do, and that is they will eventually, when they are no longer legally bound to release Call of Duty on the PlayStation, take it away from PlayStation. So yeah, I figured we would just cover this because, a lot of people are maybe wondering why Sony is so distrusting of Microsoft, and this is why. It's basically because of the way they handled Bethesda, and even though Microsoft is doing everything they can to try to convince Sony that, their ultimate intention at the end of the day, even if it's many years from now, is not to take Call of Duty away, Sony is pretty certain that that's exactly what Microsoft wants to do. And so they're not just going to, simply say, okay, we'll sign the deal and we'll comply, even though we know exactly what's going to happen when that 10 years is up. So figured we would just cover this, but that's going to do it for the video, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you found it informative. Leave it a like if you did. Subscribe if you're new. Hit the bell notification icon, and feel free to share this video out on top of all that. But until next time, guys, take care.